All right, welcome to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Franklin from Streeter PD. He has 40 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to having a conversation. Welcome to the show, Chief Franklin. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you, Paige, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. 40 years.
Yeah, when I got hired by Chicago PD in 1982, I was a 22-year-old kid, a year out of college with a bachelor's degree in media communications, and I thought I'd only stay for 2 years, believe it or not, and get back because the economy was kind of in a shambles then. And I said, well, I can do this for 2 years, and I'll get back into this my field, which was writing news for radio and TV. I'd worked at actually WGN TV here in Chicago as an intern when I my junior year, and I wrote news for the radio program at WGN Radio in the morning. And I took the test with two buddies of mine at Northeastern Illinois University who really wanted the job. Like I said, they just talked me into going up, signing up with them. And as it turned out, neither one of them did well on the test. And excuse me. And I had scored very high, and they hired me the next year. And I can remember my father, excuse me, being a little bit disappointed because I was the first of his three sons to graduate with a bachelor's degree. And I remember when they called and offered me the job, and I got off the phone. My mom and dad said, "Well, son, who was that?" I said, "That was the police department, Mom." My dad said, "What do they want?" I said, "Dad, they offered me the job of being a police officer." He said, "Well, I know you turned them down." I said, "Dad, I start next Monday."
Wow.
And they both looked at each other like, "Oh boy." So, but it worked out. I mean, I enjoyed everything I learned in the academy, and I made some lifelong friends there. And I learned a lot about myself.
You,
I grew up a lot.
you said you wanted to stay for 2 years, and that was kind of the game plan, but what kept you there?
You know, I enjoyed the job.
Mm.
And I had a great field training officer, Officer Louis Velez, who's still alive today. We talk from time to time. And Louis was a great FTO, had a very strong sense of right or wrong, and he kept me on an even keel. And as the years went on, I realized that I was kind of good at this. And I had some great partners. I worked plain clothes for about 9 of my 12 years in the South Chicago district. Caught a lot of bad guys, took a lot of bad guys off the street, had a lot of fun. I mean, they almost didn't have to pay us. We were just so happy to be there and do the job. We could have done it for free, literally. That's how we were back then.
I love that. And
Mhm.
how important do you think it is to have strong FTOs that are setting that example for the younger guys and girls?
They often say that the patrol sergeant is the backbone of the police department. I would say that's true to a large extent, but I would say the field training officers guide the culture
Mm.
of the police department because depending on what kind of field training officer you get, will kind of predicate what kind of policeman you or police officer you're going to be after that training is done. If
Mhm.
you have a good, aggressive, smart police officer that's respectful and treats the public the way they want to be treated, you'll be that officer too. Conversely, if you have an officer that isn't very respectful of the public or feels that they're going to lay back, they're not going to be the first car on the scene, or even if it's their assignment, they'll let someone else take it because they don't want to they'd rather be a follower than a leader. You're probably going to gravitate in that same space once you're done because that's all you know.
Yeah.
So it's important to put your best foot forward. Any police department, I would say it's important to put your best feet forward. Make sure you have the best officers being field training officers because you want your new upcoming people to emulate them. You don't want them to emulate what I call the BMPs, the bare minimum police. We got plenty of those out there, you know.
Yeah. No, I love that. And
Mhm.
for anyone who, maybe doesn't know you, you were involved in Terrortown. What
Well,
is what
Terrytown,
is Terrortown? Explain a little bit, because I know Southside Chicago. There's
Southeast Side, Terrytown was my beat in South Chicago. It was part of my beat. I patrolled 75th to 79th Street from Yates to the lakefront. And that is probably the roughest stretch of the South Chicago district, of the whole district. And that was my beat for me. Even when I started working plainclothes in the district, that's where I concentrated most of my efforts at. That's where most of my search warrants I executed were in that area because it was a high concentration of drugs, high concentration of violent crime, high concentration of domestic incidents, which are always stressful. So, in that little area, that little small beat where we got most of the action. So, and it's still called Terrortown to this day, believe it or not.
I don't know if I told you this offline, but I used to live in the Chicago area for a little
Mm,
bit. When I was 21, I was like, I need a life experience. And I moved
mm,
to Chicago. I lived in Rosemont for a little bit, so right outside the city.
mm.
And my parents were so scared.
Sure.
I remember every Monday they were like calling me with like news reports. And I was like, that's another area. And I'm pretty sure it was the area that you're talking about because it was always in the news and, talking about murders and things that had happened over the weekend. So it's interesting that you experienced that firsthand and that was a part of your day to day.
Yeah, I handled quite a few homicide scenes. I think I probably arrested about 5 or 6 murderers in my lifetime as a Chicago police officer. Uh, it happens. It's part of the job. When I was a chief for 2 years in a city in Arkansas, and every Monday, Arkansas residents would call me and say, Chief, my God, look what's going on in Chicago. I'm reading in the paper there's 70 people shot dead out there. I said, guys, what can I tell you? It
Yeah,
is what it is. You know, we we're at a time in our lives here as human beings where we settle far too many petty differences at the wrong end of a gun rather than talking it out or saying, this is too silly to even harbor any ill will toward this person, or why would I dwell on this? Well, people sit back and say, I'm going to get a gun and fix that so and so.
yeah,
And you ruin so many lives. You ruin your own life, the person you wounded or killed, plus your own family, his or her family.
yeah,
It's not just you. There's a lot of tentacles to the octopus, shall we say. People's lives are changed forever over violence, domestic violence, gun violence, murder. People really need to think it out. And I would think out of all the things we teach people in schools, anger management needs to be there at a very early age. The kids understand it's okay to be angry, but what do you do with that anger? How do you channel that anger? Are you going to channel into something positive? Are you going to find a positive, a beneficial way to dissipate that? Or are you going to let it sit in there and fester and fume and let it explode onto someone else and change a lot of people's lives forever for the worse?
yeah.
A lot of people don't really get that until it's too late.
I completely agree with you. And, I think that all of our decisions have a ripple effect,
Sure,
right?
definitely.
And that can be positive or negative. And I love that piece of advice because I agree. I think that there are a lot of skills that maybe aren't taught that should be or could be at an early
Yes,
age. And emotional regulation
yes,
being one of them. How can we
definitely.
equip you with the tools to be able to, I call it the power of the pause. And I think that it's really powerful to be able to pause before responding. And I
Mhm.
think that is what emotional regulation really is. It's
Right.
how can you have control over your actions and reactions?
Sure.
Because a lot of times those decisions are, um, in a way, feel out of your control, right? They're like these
Right.
split second decisions of like, I'm going to respond emotionally to this. And
Mhm.
a lot of times when we do that, and it could be in a simple way, it could be like an argument and just something that you said, and
Sure.
usually it's not the best, and you have to kind of backtrack of like, oh no, what did I just do? And now I have to try to correct that. But if you had that emotional regulation and that ability to step back for a moment and say, how do I want to respond? And really think it through, even if it's for like a few seconds, I
Right.
think that a lot of those poor decisions wouldn't be made in the
Mhm.
first place.
And it's not only just even on the civilian end. I have had this step between officers that I saw
Mm.
were so ramped up that they couldn't bring it down to the point where I wasn't concerned about not just them, but say maybe the person they were trying to arrest or person they had arrested. There
Yeah.
were times where I had to step in and tell the sergeant, Sarge, I'm going to drive in so and so's prisoner, and the officer will say, no, I'm going to, and the sergeant say, no, let John take him in. John, you take him to lockup. I'm going to have a word with you, officer, because that officer need to come down,
Yeah.
because I could see where this was going, and you don't want to be a part of something like that. So you have to ramp it down. You'll find in a lot of police agencies today, they have a duty to intervene clause
Mm,
because in the past, few officers would step up and intervene when an officer was going too far,
mm,
when an officer was so ramped up that, okay, you had to use force to get this guy down and get him cuffed, but it's over now. Let it go. And you have to stop that. You have to intervene because now we're all wearing body cams.
yep.
You can't hide and lie to the camera. The camera catches what it catches. Once it's out there, it's out there. And I've seen careers destroyed because of that. And a lot when we first started wearing body cams, a lot of officers were apprehensive. But I'll tell you, body cams save more policemen far more than they hurt. And
Mm,
the ones they hurt, that's on them.
mm,
You're wearing a body cam. We've sat down and talked about policies. We've explained to every officer what is expected of them regarding professional conduct, professional behavior, professional demeanor. And, if you can't meet the standard, maybe you need to find another profession because no chief is going to sit back or should sit back and allow someone to disparage or destroy the reputation of their agency. If you can't reel someone in, then they need to go find something else to do.
100%. What were some of the things that you did throughout your career that helped you to offload some of that stuff and to manage your stress and, keep yourself physically and mentally well throughout a 40-year career?
Well, first of all, family, children. My kids are adults now, but being around my kids, taking them to kid events, going to their games, their violin lessons, their dance recitals, their tennis lessons, volleyball games, all of that. Secondly, I would get to work about 90 minutes early and work out. We had a decent gym in the South Chicago district, and I would get a good workout in before the shift started because I worked the worst beat in the district. And I knew there was probably going to be a struggle or two sometime during the night. You go on a domestic, guys telling you, no, you're not taking me to jail, sir. I'm going to have to. No, I'm not going. Well, it's going to be a bit of a scuffle till we get this man in cuffs and get him in a wagon if we have to call the squad roll or get him in a car and take him to station. Uh, you're out there working the streets, you can't afford to lose in those kind of situations. So
Mm,
you have to bring your A game every night. And sometimes it's hard. You sit in court all day. You might have had 3 or 4 hours sleep. Now I got to go back and do a midnight. Or your kid's been sick all day and you've been home with your child all day. And you haven't had a lot of rest because they need comfort. You got to make sure you're giving them medicine at certain intervals. And, sometimes you burn that candle at both ends, but staying fit helps alleviate some of the negative effects. And also during the day, you're going up and down emotionally. You got bursts of adrenaline. You're getting a man with a gun call, and then they're telling you, oh, we're getting shots fired now. Several calls are coming in. So now we know on the way there. Damn, that's bona fide. Somebody's out there shooting, and I'm pulling up in the middle of this. So of course your adrenaline level's up to here, and you need to get there and resolve it, and adrenaline goes out. And when that adrenaline leaves you, it can just sap you of all your energy. And you may have that happen several times a night. And studies have proven that's not good for your heart.
mhm,
That's not good for your stress levels, not good for your circulatory system, it's not good for your blood pressure. But this is what you're going to experience as a first responder. And not just police, fire too. We recently in Chicago had a fire captain was killed when a garage fell in on him, I think in the last month. It doesn't happen often, but a few times a year or maybe a year and a half, we lose firemen when structures collapse, when floors cave in. Those things happen. They're occupational hazards, but when they happen, they have a devastating effect on a whole lot of people.
yeah. And I love that you talked about getting in front of the stress because you know that it's coming.
Oh yeah.
Like you know that there's the possibility of all of these things happening within one night. and how can you set yourself up for success? And you mentioned two different aspects of it that I wanted to kind of circle back to.
Mhm.
One was, hey, I know that physically this job is really demanding, and there might be times where I need to be running, grappling, like,
Yes,
detain someone. So I need to be physically fit and strong to be able to perform those functions of my career and to be able to do that safely. I also know that, throughout the night, throughout that shift, that my cortisol is going to be going up and down, my heart rate is
sure.
going to be going up and down, stress is going to be going up and down. And so, how can I set myself up mentally for that shift? How can I regulate in advance to make sure that like I can recover quicker? And I have the tools and resources to do that.
I will say that you can't prepare for everything.
Yeah.
I can recall, and because policemen on the street, policemen save a lot of lives in fires because we're already out there. The fire truck has to leave the barn. We're already on the street. We get a call of a fire. We get there right away. I can remember one time a lady threw a little girl down to me and my partner from a fire that started in a house. We caught the little girl and we saw that her hand was badly burned. Her skin was basically falling off like it was liquid skin. And we rushed her to the hospital. And we didn't give any more thought to what was going on at the house because the firemen were there. While we're at the hospital, firemen came in with two body bags, set them up on gurneys. It was a little girl's mother and her grandmother. They didn't make it out alive. So you see stuff that affects you. And you can't, I never thought I'd see something like that. Or how could you prepare for that? So you do the best you can, but this job has a lot of twists and turns that will affect you in ways that you just don't know. And hopefully, at least today, we have counseling services for officers. For instance, one of my officers here in Streeter, he had less than 2 years on the job and got in a shooting out here. And Streeter's a town of, 12,500 residents. And we got a call of a man with a gun, no, excuse me, a man with a knife in a park. And when the officer showed up, the man apparently called on himself.
Mhm.
And when the officer showed up, he walked up to the guy and said, hey, buddy, anything going on out here? Well, the guy jumped off the bench with a knife and backed my officer up all the way to a squad car. We had a pickup truck at the time, which caused the officer at that time to draw his weapon and fire, and fired two shots into the man. The man survived, and but I remember we had to give him time off to handle counseling, and he'd even asked me at one point, Chief, would it be okay if I went back and talked to the counselor again? I said, absolutely. You take the time off you need. He said, well, I feel bad. I've been off 2 weeks. I said, listen, this job will survive without you. You deal with you and you deal with your family. And when you're ready, we're ready to get you back out here, because we all survive. We'll manage, you know, but family first and mental health first, because many of the calls we deal with out here are not crime calls per se. They're mental health reach outs because people haven't been treated or they're treating themselves with, drugs off the street, meth, heroin. Uh, and like I said, a lot of these calls, I say up to 40% of our calls are
Yeah.
mental illness calls. We are fighting some crime too, but a lot of it is just trying to help people that are having extreme mental breakdowns, sometimes multiple times, in a month, going back to the same people. And I would say as a country, we're overloaded with mental health issues. There's not enough services. There's not enough counselors. There's not enough therapists. And we're seeing this play out in all. Look at all these things going on airplanes now. We never saw people act out when the pilots to turn a plane around and go land somewhere to get somebody off a plane because they're having an episode. We're seeing that happen more and more. So
Yeah.
that tells you we're in the throes of some serious mental health issues in this country that haven't been addressed for a long time. And sadly, society has dumped a lot of it on the police. Let the police handle it. Let the police handle it. Well, we're not all necessarily equipped to deal with those issues when they flare up. And sometimes when they flare up violently, yeah, we understand he or she is mentally ill. But if they're coming at you with a knife or a gun or a machete, that's a very serious issue,
Yeah.
very serious. And I understand the officers, they're trained. We have critical incident training all the time. I went to a class yesterday on preventing unnecessary use of force among first responders. I was there all day for an 8-hour session. But there are times when we show up on some of these calls and we're literally backed into a corner the minute we step out the car, if we can get out of the car. Sometimes it runs up to us.
Yeah. Well, one, I think it's great that you're putting a focus on training and how to respond to those things and recognizing that there is a challenge. And I think you and I talked about this a little offline that, I was having a conversation with someone earlier and they said, like, we don't have a homeless problem, we have a mental health problem. And
Exactly.
the mental health issues are resulting, and it kind of goes back to that ripple effect that we talk about, or you said earlier, the tentacles.
Tentacles of the octopus. Yes.
And that's resulting in unhealthy coping mechanisms,
Yes.
right? So alcoholism, drug use, and any other unhealthy coping mechanism
Mhm.
that you can think of in these mental health crises because um, people don't know how to cope with their life situations. And you said something to me offline, and I was hoping that you could expand on what you meant by this, but you said stress is the silent killer. And I think that that's a really powerful statement. And I think that that can go towards a lot of different things. What did you mean when you said stress is the silent killer?
You know, Stress can lead to hypertension, heart attack, heart disease, uh, elevated levels of blood pressure. I never even knew I had high blood pressure until I retired from Chicago Police Department after 28 years. And 3 years later, I took a job with a South Suburban police agency just outside of Chicago. And I had to take a general exam, physical exam for the job. And the doctor told me, I'm going to put you down as passed, but your blood pressure is way too high. I want you to see your personal physician. Well, I went to go see my personal physician, and she put me in a hospital right away that
Mm,
day. And I found out I have a cardiac condition, which is treated by medication. But if I hadn't had that physical, if I hadn't got on that path, I wouldn't be here today. It would have killed me. And my doctor called it a lucky find.
no,
And I'm very fortunate. That was in 2013. Here it is, 2025, and I'm still here, 66 years old. And I'm very fortunate. But things happen for a reason. I was very lucky that I went through all that and found out what I had and what I needed to do to get right. So, you
And
know,
I think it's really interesting because I think historically and this is still a challenge.
yeah,
And I do think that this also relates to stress. And that's why I said, like, I think stress can really manifest itself in different areas of life.
right.
Historically, within, the first responder community, there was always this statistic about suicide. And now there's so much information coming out that's saying actually the number one cause of death within first responder profession is cardiac issues, heart attack, cardiac arrest, and because of a number of things, but a lot to do with stress. Right. And
Yeah,
like you said before, your heart rate is up, your blood pressure is up, your cortisol is up, your heart is on overdrive, and it's
yeah,
causing a lot of challenges within this
yeah.
profession.
Having those adrenaline spurts, multiple adrenaline spurts throughout the day is definitely not healthy, but you can't help it. Some of these calls, you're like, oh my God, you can hear people screaming in the background through the dispatcher. You know, of course, it's going to elevate you, and of course, your feelings of apprehension of what the heck am I going to run into when I get there. Like I said, you hear calls come out of shots fired, then multiple calls are coming out. There's a woman down on the street now. They got two people down, and you're a block and a half away. Am
Mhm.
I going to run into a running gun battle? Is it going to be over? What can I do to help these people? How can I get the scene safe so that an ambulance can come in there and help these people? What can I do to help the other first responders that are coming? You've got all that running through your mind. And then you got to make that scene safe while the firemen and the EMTs are working on those people because sometimes they'll come back and try to finish what they started.
Yeah.
It's a lot to be aware of. It's a lot to comprehend on a daily basis. It's almost akin to, you know, being in a war zone in some of our neighborhoods in Chicago.
Yeah.
Uh, and that you do that for years.
Mhm.
And of course, that's going to have an effect on you. And you've got to be aware of stress. You got to find ways to alleviate it and get it off of you before it metastasizes to your body, to your organs. You've got to find a way to do it because if you don't, you may not live long enough to retire.
Right.
Or when you retire, you may not live long enough to get many pension checks. When I retired in 2010, a lot of the people that I retired with were dead within 2 or 3 years.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah. And to me, that's really sad. I would hope that you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, that you get to
sure,
enjoy your life after retirement and be with your family and your kids and your grandkids or your
sure,
wife, and be able to do the things you want to do and it's not over in a couple of years. And
right,
so I think one of the things that you said that stood out to me is in this profession, you can't avoid the stress. The stress comes with the job, right?
yes,
And you
yes,
you can't, like you said, there's a lot of things that maybe you don't know how to prepare for until
right,
you're in it. But how can you alleviate that in a healthy way? And having positive outlets and healthy coping mechanisms to be able to keep yourself healthy after the fact. And I know that we talked a little bit about the things that you do, and we kind of chuckled before the episode started because you told me you still are an avid fitness guy and you
yeah,
ran 3 miles this morning.
yeah,
So it's still something that's really important to you is fitness and making sure that you're getting into, I think you said you work out at least 4 times a week, you're
that's it,
running,
right,
you go to the YMCA, you're maybe in better shape than some of the younger officers because it's something that you've prioritized throughout your whole career to be able to offload some of that stress and keep yourself in peak
sure.
shape.
And also, I got a grandson now who's almost 2. So he's a delight, and I love to see him, and I got to have energy to run around with him because I raised 2 daughters.
Mhm.
I never raised a boy, and he is just into everything. He is rambunctious. He climbs up on everything. I've got to constantly be on him because I look up, what are you doing there? And he'll that, he's just hilarious, but he's quite an adventurous young man. So I've got to have the energy to stay with him, because you can't half step with a 2-year-old, especially him, because he can run, he can jump, he can climb.
Yeah.
He's quite the character. And I'm going to have a new grandson in the next month. So I want to be around for a while to help my daughter and her husband raise those kids. They really are. I tell you, being a parent's great. I think being a grandparent might even be a little bit better because you can always give them back too.
Right. And I think it's an important message. It's like, and I talk about this a lot, but I think it's one of the most important things when it comes to wellness is like, what is your why? Like,
Yeah.
why is that important for you?
Right.
And that's going to look different at different phases of your life.
Mhm.
Maybe when you were back working Terror Town, it was, so that you could be safe and effective on the streets. Maybe it's so that you can make it home to your family every night. And now it's, I want to run around with my grandkids and I want to be there to help,
Yeah.
support my kids and raise my grandkids. Like, I think that why changes, but I think if you have that deeper reason, okay, this is why it's important to me to be physically and mentally well, then the motivation is that. Like, that's your
Yeah.
motivation to get
Yeah.
up and do the thing because getting up early, 90 minutes before your shift and working out every day is dedication. It takes effort, right? And waking up
Yeah.
before our podcast, and for anyone who's listening, we're filming this pretty dang early. So to get up early and run 3 miles, that's dedication to your why.
Well, I have to say it's selfish too because I want to make it home to the end of my shift.
Mhm.
So I knew I need to rise above some things that were going to confront me during those 8 hours on the street. It wasn't just Terrortown. I worked in our Cabrini Green housing project here in Chicago. That was my beat for 3 years on the midnight shift. I trained 5 recruits during that time, and that too was a very rough place to work every day. For 3 years, got shot at dozens and dozens of times uh, during the course of those 3 years. It goes with the territory. Again, having good partners, keeping in the right perspective, and also at the same time developing relationships with people out there on the streets. Because you got to have a friend. I'll tell you, every policeman should know you got to make friends out there. You have to go to people out there that you can trust, that trust you to find out what really happened. And those take efforts too. Those take a lot of efforts. Um, I like the fact that many police departments now have EAPs, employee assistance programs, where officers can go seek counseling for a variety of issues because alcoholism is not a stranger in many first responder agencies. It certainly wasn't when I came on the police department in Chicago 44 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's not I'm sure it's not a stranger today. Back in my day when they started random drug testing, they only tested for, cocaine, heroin, that sort of thing. Well, now in Chicago Police Department, they don't only test for drugs, they test for anabolic steroids and for alcohol because you don't need to be on the street if you're impaired. And
Mhm.
if you're using steroids, those play out with high anger issues too,
Mhm.
those hormones. So you've got to make sure that officers are safe and that they're not doing anything that's going to ramp up their response in a negative fashion. It's going to reflect poorly on not just on them, but on the department in general. Every chief is a gatekeeper to their agency. And that's first of all, our major job is to make sure we have adequate manpower on patrol, but we have to protect the reputation of our agency. And if anybody proves themselves to not be able to get with the program, that, hey, we're going to treat people respectfully, we're going to arrive promptly, give prompt, courteous service. And if they can't go along with that program, then they might need to go look for another profession to do. But I know that these officers today, just like we did, you see a lot of ugly. You don't see people at the best. People who have stable families, they're not calling us for help. People that have unstable families or dysfunctional families, they're the ones calling us. And after a while, you see so much of this, it can affect you psychologically uh, to the point where you may feel that this is a normal condition of people. It's not a normal condition of people. This is just what you're saying because this is where you fall into here,
Mhm.
trying to help and fix these situations. Uh, You can't let that kind of thing. First of all, my students, I used to teach in a college when I retired from CPD, and I taught for 7.5 years at a community college. And I got about 10 students now that are in law enforcement. And they would always ask me, Professor Franklin, what does it take to survive a career in law enforcement? And I would look at them and I'd say, duck feathers. They said, what does that mean?
Let's sign off.
I said, everything has to roll off of you. You can't take it personal, can't take it home. Because if you do, you're done. And they thought about it. I said, I know you don't understand it now, but we'll talk about it at the next class. We'll go into it in more detail. And they came back, they said, yeah, professor, we understand now what you meant.
Mhm.
It's duck feathers. You can't internalize this stuff. You can't go home and beat your significant other because you've seen it so many times that you think this is a normal expression of not liking what someone said or did, because dinner wasn't ready or the house wasn't clean or whatever, or they left the car with no gas in the tank. You know, this is not a healthy expression of being disappointed in someone. So I think they all understood that. And I would always talk to them about stress and how to alleviate it, how to stay on the right path, how to pull people away who are going down the wrong path, or letting your supervisor know, boss, sergeant, lieutenant, whatever, corporal, if they have that, you might need to have a word with so and so. Back in my day, people weren't so open to going and telling the boss that somebody was having a rough time. I can remember one time when I was a sergeant, a female officer came to me and told me, you need to talk to so and so, my partner. I said, what's going on? And she said, well, his wife just called him on the phone, said she wants out of their marriage. She's going to move back to Texas with the kids. I said, where's he at? He's in the locker room. He's pretty upset. So I went in and talked to him, and he was very distraught. And I excused him for the day. I made him leave his gun in the locker. And I told him, don't go home. Go to your mom's house. Matter of fact, I'll have somebody drive you to your mom's house. And I want you to call me in the morning. I was very worried about him because I could see, this came out of nowhere while he's working.
Yeah.
And I think, we have a high rate of suicide in this profession. And it's from what I can tell, from what I see, from what I know, have seen it from people that I know who have taken their lives. A lot of it comes when they have an intimate relationship that is just gone completely 180 degrees. And it caught them so off guard, they didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know how to handle it. When I was in some new chief training through ALETSB, Illinois Law Enforcement Training Standards Board, there was a deputy chief from a department who told me, he said, I came home one day and I did what I always do, sat in my recliner, got a beer, watched TV. He said his wife came and told him, you know, me and the kids are just about out of here. He said, what are you talking about? She said, we are so fed up with you coming home and not interacting with us, not speaking to us, just sitting here in your little bubble, here in your recliner, here with your beer, here with the TV, not interacting, having dinner with us. He said, we're just all fed up. We're up to here. And he said he had no idea. And he said he had to really work on himself to save his family because his wife just told him, we're all about, just about up out of here. That's how we all feel, me and the kids.
Mm.
He realized she was serious, but he didn't see it coming until she told him. And luckily, he valued his relationship and his family so much. He said, I got to take some time off and make this right with them. And he did. And, for the better. But he said that could have been him eating his gun or something, to that effect, because it came from out of nowhere. When I was a chief in Arkansas, I had a 18-year veteran officer there take his life 3 weeks after I arrived. Again, wife wanted out, and he just couldn't handle it. And he was seeing a therapist. He was taking prescription antidepressants. And matter of fact, the day he took his life, he came and saw me in the office at 9:30 that Friday morning. He said, Chief, I had a real good sleep last night. I had a real good relaxing sleep. I talked to my wife this morning. We're going to continue to co-parent our daughter. I had a 14-year-old daughter. She'll spend 1 week with me, 1 week with her. I see my therapist this afternoon. I said, Chief, I feel like I've finally turned things around. I said, man, I am so proud of you. That was at 9:30. 10:52 was dead in my parking lot.
Mm.
So you just never know. But again, he talked to me every day. I talked to him every night at 6. Sometimes he called me at midnight. I talked to him. And I even told my captains, if he comes in here during my meeting with the captains, he's upset or distraught, I said, just leave the room. We'll pick up the meeting later. I want him to feel he can come here and talk to me about anything at any time. And I always, expressed to him, you've got to think about your daughter. He said, I don't know how I don't know what I can do. I said, you're 42 years old. People start over older than you, but you have an obligation, you and your wife, to raise a well-adjusted, competent, young adult female. That is your main job now. Do you understand that? He said, yeah, I get that. I said, just make sure you understand that is your main goal, is to be there for her. And
Mm.
I'd always hoped that would dissuade him from what he ultimately did, but clearly it didn't.
Yeah. And it's devastating. It's so sad to hear
Yeah,
stories like that. And it feels, and I know that it's probably not exactly true, but it kind of goes back to your point when you see it all the time, it feels like it's happening all the time.
sure.
I'm seeing it still on LinkedIn.
You,
It
you, you
feels
can't
like,
see all that negative on a daily basis and it not
yeah,
affect you in some way.
yeah,
But you have to find a way to move past it,
yeah.
unload it, you know.
Well, and I think that I kind of wrote down like the key points and it's also intertwined. And I love everything that you said about one, how can you learn how to manage the stressors of not just the job, but also life in a
Yeah.
healthy way. And
Hmm.
there's lots of ways to do that. And we mentioned, on this podcast, fitness, therapy, talking to somebody, your family, being present with them and doing activities with them, having a deeper reason why you want to be healthy and using that as your motivation to take action, which is going to in turn improve your health, right?
Yeah.
We're going to see you better physically and mentally so that you can interact with your peers, with your community, with your family in a more positive and effective way, which in return is going to,
Sure.
and make the community support you more, your family
Right.
be more engaged and happier. And then, having good leadership in place that is supportive of these
Yes.
things is,
That is so important because we didn't have that when I came on the job. And they would just tell you, kid, this is the job. Suck it up. We don't tell the young people that today, of course, and nor should we. We should make sure they are getting adequate resources to offload some of the stressors they see on a daily basis.
yeah.
We see a lot of life that's not pretty. We see kids suffering. We see uh, violent domestic relationships where there are alternatives, but people won't take them.
Mhm.
Uh, we have a shelter here in Streeter that I've driven many people to. Some people I've driven there several times. I haven't been here quite 3 years yet. Um, you know, seeing seeing all that you see can have an effect on you over time. I can tell you how I dealt with stress back in my day, and then also working nights. Where's a healthy place to eat? Now I bring a salad just about every day to lunch. When I worked on midnights, the only thing open was White Castle, and I'm not knocking White Castle. I'm just saying you should make a diet of it on a daily basis. But there are alternatives. Now, if you work nights, I see people bring a good, bring a little Tupperware container, whatever, with something healthy to eat rather than go out there and eat junk. Garbage in, garbage out. You've got to strategize to survive this job on the long haul. Not just today, it's not next year's. If you're going to make a career of this is what you need to do. And I think departments should have nutritionists come in and talk to officers about what's healthy to consume and what's not. Uh, Again, alcohol still probably consumed far too much in our first responder agencies, fire, police, and probably others. Uh, you need health counseling on that. You know, it's a war out there, but you don't have to let the war consume you.
I love that you said garbage in, garbage out, and then you said the long haul. Like, how can you prepare yourself so that you have longevity? And that's really, I think, this whole conversation was really about that. It's like, how can you make sure that you have a long career, a long retirement? And I think that by putting these things in place that we talked about, it's going to prolong and save lives. My question to you, because, I think that all of this conversation comes from experience and wisdom. You've seen it, you've been in it, you understand what the job does to you physically and mentally. How do you get young people who haven't been in this career long enough, who maybe haven't seen or experienced those things yet, to proactively prioritize their wellness through some of the strategies that we already covered?
I think the young people are doing okay from what I see here in my department. I've got a lot of young people and they work out. I see them at the YMCA, so I know they're popping up there and running, lifting,
Mhm.
doing whatever they got to do to keep themselves healthy. And I talk to their other halves because I see them sometimes. Their other halves are up there too. And I say, make sure he stays up here. Make sure he gets here at least 3 days a week. So don't worry, Chief. I'll make sure. I said, please do. I said, he's
Yeah.
a good officer, but I want him to also take care of himself. And
Mhm.
I always remind them, all of them, that family always comes first. You've got personal days, you've got sick days. If you're sick, use them. I used to come to work. Sometimes I'd have a cold so bad I didn't have a voice. I'd be on there, and the dispatcher would say, "Why are you here?" because I knew the job needed me. As I got older, I realized other people will do this job. They'll get this job done when I'm not here because that's what these organizations do. You bring in younger people, and the older people get moved out, the younger people move up, and you just can't be the one go-to guy. You know, I can remember one New Year's Eve night as a sergeant. I was the only sergeant on the street in my district. My captain had given every other sergeant on my watch the night off. I said, Captain, why would you do that? No, this is like one of our craziest nights of the year. He said, John, I knew you were competent and I knew you could handle it, which was a bunch of nonsense. He just took care of the other people. But, I was totally stressed out that New Year's Eve night because we had a lot of people out there that were acting up and some of them had to go to jail. And of course, they were determined they weren't going to jail. So I had a lot of report writing to write, uh, IOD report, injury on duty reports to the officers, documenting use of force, all of that stuff. I had 3 large packets on my desk in the morning that I had to fax down to the first deputy's office. I was busy all night long. I was really overworked, and but the captain took care of his people. But because I was the low guy on the seniority totem pole, there I was working alone. And I had 34 officers that I was supposed to supervise that night. Now, how can I reasonably supervise 34 officers? Obviously, I can't.
Right.
But that's the old job. It's just, here, kid, get it done. And now we don't think like that now, and nor should we. When I was a watch commander, as I moved up the ranks, there were times I would ask my sergeant after roll call, "What's going on with that guy?" He said, "Well, Lieutenant, he's got a new baby at home, and I don't think he's getting much rest." I said, "Okay, have him come see me 2 hours from now." And he come in. He said, "What's up, Lieutenant?" I said, "I'm sending you home for the night. I'm excusing you." He said, "Why?" It's because you're dead on your feet.
Mhm.
I can see it, and I know you are. He said, "Yeah, it's been rough." It just says, "I know it is. Do you need somebody to take you home? Are you too tired to drive? Or can you get yourself home?" I think I can get myself. I'm gonna have your partner follow you home anyway, just to make sure you get home okay. Get you some rest. And I would excuse him
Yeah.
because I could see he's dead on his feet, and I don't need you out there like that. And after 2 hours, I have that option as the boss. I can send you home for the rest of the day, excuse. So I would do it because I can look at people at roll call and see, wow, couple of these guys are really beat up, tired, or maybe they had a murder trial that's been going on for 2 or 3 days. Well, they go home, get an hour's sleep, and now they got to sit in Cook County Jail all day for a trial, and now you got to come back at 11 o'clock.
Right.
You can look at people. If you know your people, you can look at them and tell if they haven't had sufficient rest. And if I'm able to do it, yeah, I'll get rid of them. Well, it's 2 o'clock in the morning now. Things should be quiet. Get them out of here. And I know they appreciated it because I had their wives will call and say, "Thank you for sending him home. I was so worried about him going into work tonight. And I'm glad you saw what I saw when he got out of bed." But, when you're a boss, that's what you got to do. You got to look out for your people, see these signs and rectify it.
100%. And I really like that message of we don't need you out there like that. Like I recognize that there's something going on. You're too stressed, too tired, whatever it is. And if you have the ability to let them go home and get some rest and take care of themselves. And to your point, I think it does. It takes that awareness
Yeah.
of really looking at your people and knowing when there's signs of those things going on. And so I think that that's a great message for any, leadership out there. If you have the ability and you have that awareness, then you can take care of your people. And it seems like a small thing, but it's not. It's such a huge gesture of like, hey, I see you, I support you, I have your back. I want you to be safe. I want you to be well. What do we need to do to make sure that that can happen?
Well, even here in street guy here, sometimes we have an occasional guy that may call off work in the morning. And due to seniority, the low guy on the totem pole who worked all night from 6 p.m. till 6 in the morning might have to stay another 6 hours. Now he's working an 18-hour day. So I would tell those guys, listen, I'll relieve you at 10 a.m. I want you to go home. And believe it or not, one of the officers actually complained about it to my boss. Said he's not a police officer because I'm not counted as a police officer. I'm counted as management.
Mm.
But if I see someone's exhausted, again, I'll send them home. So when we renewed the contract with my officers, it's in the contract now that I can relieve them off the street, off duty, on for up to 2 hours. I can't work a whole shift, and I don't want to work a whole shift. I'm 66 years old. I don't want to do 12 hours on the street. But I've had guys tell me, Chief, thank you. Especially when that same officer who I've relieved at 10 a.m. has got to be back at 6 p.m. that same day to
Mm.
work his shift again. At least he has 8 hours to go home and relax as opposed to six, you know. But, I do what I can for my people because I care about them. And I don't want to hear about them crashing on the way home and maybe not surviving when I could have maybe done something to alleviate that or prevent that.
Mm.
So,
I have one final question for you.
mm.
What words of wisdom would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Stay true to your values. Don't be swayed by some of the negative aspects, not only of society, but some of the negative people you may find yourself working with in any particular law enforcement agency. Uh, don't be afraid to reach out and help people. I heard an interesting saying yesterday at my training, where the instructor was saying, this instructor was a very aggressive officer. He wrote a DUI every night and all this, and an old timer pulled him to the side and said, "Listen, kid, one thing you're going to find out soon enough: nobody can shove anything up your butt if you're sitting on it all day." And I thought, what a lousy attitude to have to go through for 20, 30 years. I'm just going to sit here and do nothing and just protect myself from whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, you can't always avoid complaints. You can be as polite as anything to people, and people may still pick up a phone and complain. At least that's the way I saw it in Chicago. You could get a complaint over anything. I will say that my people here are very fair. I have never had a complaint forwarded to me alleging racial discrimination or abuse of force, which is great considering I'm coming up on my third year here. Now I'm not gonna say that complaints haven't come in, and I've had to sit people down and talk to them about maybe their demeanor, how they maybe don't show enough patience with senior citizens, this and that. But because nobody's perfect, and we can all stand some improvement. But I would remind officers that, don't forget your values. Don't forget the importance of your family. Keep civilian friends. Pick up hobbies that you enjoy doing and keep them. Do things away from this job. And I hope that will help. And I always tell them, if you have a problem with anything, come see me. I took when I hired my first female officer here.
Mhm.
I sat down and told all the guys here, if she comes to me with a problem from any of you, you are going to have a problem with me.
Mhm.
Does everybody understand that? They said, yes, sir. Haven't had any complaints. And she's a well-liked, well-respected member of this department. She's well-liked and respected out here on the street. She's a producer. She's a high-level performer. And I hope in the future I can bring some more women into the department because we need them.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you, Chief Franklin. I appreciate your time so much and your
oh, you're welcome.
wisdom. I honestly, it's an honor to have you on here. So thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure to be considered. Thank you very much and have a good day. Have a good week.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.